In this clip, I want to talk a little bit about rotation order. So what is rotation order? Well, rotation order has to do with the way Maya calculates rotations. Now, initially, this is something that's a little bit hidden away from us. When we go ahead and start rotating, we don't see anything unusual. We can rotate on each axis, and everything appears to work just fine. If we actually rotate on one axis at a time, we'll notice here in our channel box that only one axis at a time is affected, right? There's the X rotating, Z rotating, and then earlier we saw the Y rotating. However, take a look what happens when I rotate a few axes at once. Now watch what happens when I rotate the Z here. Take a look, all three rotations are actually changing. So what's going on here? To see what's really going on, we can actually hold Control Shift and right click. And I can change what type of rotation gizmo I'm using. I can choose something like World, for example. And you can see here I'm rotating the object without actually affecting it at all. It's always oriented to the world. But more importantly, we can choose Gimbal rotation. Gimbal rotation is going to be the more accurate way of representing what Maya is actually doing when it rotates. So take a look what happens. For example, when I rotate the Y, we can see that the x-axis is converging on the z-axis. And once I rotate the arrow to actually face down the x over here, I've completely lost one axis of rotation. This is referred to as gimbal lock. So why is this happening? I'm going to go ahead and undo and bring that back over. I'm going to hit Control A to go to my attribute editor. And if you look here under the transform attributes, you can see we have rotation order. Now, this rotation order should be read in reverse. What we have here is a Z rotational axis, a Y, and an X. And they're all parented to each other through a hierarchy. Z is on top, Y is underneath Z, and X is underneath Y. So take a look here in the viewport. You'll see what I mean. Let's go ahead and start by rotating the Z, which is on top. As I rotate the Z, you'll notice both the X and the Y follow. That's because they're both parented under the Z. Now, if I rotate just the Y, you'll notice that only the X-axis follows, and that's what's causing these two axes to converge on each other. And then finally, if I rotate just the X, nothing is actually parented under the X except the object, so you could see none of the other two rotate, only the object does. So this is what can cause those strange rotations. So we have to be mindful of this, especially when rigging, because let's say I'm not looking at this. I'm going to hold Control Shift to go back to my object mode. We'll go ahead and kind of rotate this over here. There we go. And I want to animate this object moving. Let's see. I'm going to go ahead and go back to Gimbal. And I want this object to pretty much just rotate towards the left here. Basically, that would be what we would imagine would be rotating along the positive. Let's go ahead and switch to object mode, the positive Y. So let's keyframe that. I'll go ahead and hold Shift E to keyframe. Then we'll go to maybe frame 40, and I'll just kind of rotate this way. Hold Shift E again to key that. And take a look what happened. We have a very, very strange, unusual rotation. And that's because if we watch it in our gimbal mode here, you could see it actually has to adjust. Fortunately, it's not showing up while we actually hit play there, but you can see it has to constantly adjust all three axes in order to get back to that position. So that's something that's going to wreak havoc on our animations. So what we need to do is when we're designing out our rigs, we need to think ahead of time of what our rotation order should be in order to get the best possible result. So I'm going to go ahead and undo those keyframes right there. Let's go ahead and put everything back to 0, 0, and 0. There we go. So let's say that what I want to happen is I want this object to rotate this way and then rotate on its side. Well, you could see that doesn't work. So we need to choose a different rotation order. We want one that's not going to basically cause my x-axis to be affected so strongly. So it's really the Z we're not using too much in this case, so we can go ahead and try a different rotation order. So let's go ahead, for example, and try one where perhaps the Z is going to be the axis that's in the center. For example, something like X, Z, and Y. So now you can see I can rotate this way and then rotate that way. Now, that does ultimately cause these two to converge, but you can see that we were able to get the animation that we wanted. Now, you'll never get rid of the gimbal lock problem. That is something that's just something we have to deal with in CG software. But we can try to predict what the most likely rotations will be inside of a rig. So, for example, on this arm over here, I can take a look at this and determine that the most likely animation is the arm is going to be dropped down like this, and the arm is going to come forward. And we could see that puts us into gimbal lock pretty quickly. But if those are the two main animations, this may not be that bad. But of course, we can experiment with different ones. We could, of course, try something like we did on the other one, XZY. And you can see in this case here, that's an immediate problem because as soon as I bring it down, we no longer have an axis to bring the arm up. So I wanted to just kind of spend a moment and explain what gimbal lock was, what rotation order was, so that as we kind of proceed and begin designing out our joints and our controls, we can keep that in mind and kind of adjust our rotation order as we go.